The sun was setting over the quiet streets of Oak Ridge Heights, a suburb known for its manicured lawns, picket fences, and an unspoken understanding of who belonged. The evening air was still, tinged with the scent of freshly cut grass and the distant hum of lawnmowers. It was the kind of neighborhood where silence spoke louder than words and strangers drew glances through curtained windows. Two patrol officers cruised slowly down Alder Lane, a routine pass through a neighborhood that rarely saw real trouble. Officer Brent Holloway, a 5-year veteran, sat behind the wheel, bored and barely paying attention. His partner, Officer Darren Mills, was younger, more eager, and known at the precinct for taking things a little too seriously. Both men were lost in idle conversation when they noticed someone walking along the sidewalk, an elderly black man, moving slowly but with purpose. He wore an old brown fedora that shaded his weathered face and carried a leather satchel that hung gently at his side. His coat, while neat, looked out of place in the warm spring air. There was no reason to suspect anything unusual about him, except that he was walking alone in a neighborhood where few black residents lived, and fewer still walked anywhere. That, to the officers, was enough reason to stop. "Hey," Mills said, tapping Holloway's arm. "You see that guy?" "Yeah," Holloway replied. "Let's check him out." They pulled the cruiser over with a quiet chirp of the siren. The man looked over calmly as the window rolled down. Holloway leaned out, squinting. "Evening, sir. Got ID on you?" The man blinked, his tone even and polite. "I'm just taking a walk." "Yeah, and we're just asking a question," Mills added, stepping out of the car now. "Let's see some ID." "You don't want trouble, old man." A few cars drove by. A jogger on the other side of the street slowed and glanced at the unfolding scene. The man reached into his coat and produced a wallet, but before he could open it, Mills grabbed the satchel from his shoulder and tossed it on the hood of the cruiser. Papers spilled out, documents, books, a notepad. "Whoa, careful," the man said quietly. "There's important stuff in there." "Yeah, I'm sure," Mills muttered, rifling through the contents with one gloved hand. Holloway came around and patted the man down roughly, forcing him to place his hands on the car. The man did not resist. He did not raise his voice. He simply stared straight ahead, letting the humiliation wash over him like a familiar storm. One paper, slightly crumpled, slid to the ground. A woman with her phone out began filming from the sidewalk. "What's this?" Holloway snorted, picking up a framed certificate from the satchel. "This real? You some retired janitor or something?" The man said nothing. Speechless. "Huh," Mills added. "All this stuff's too clean. Doesn't add up. What are you doing here?" "I live 2 blocks down," the man said, finally. "Maple Drive. Been walking this neighborhood for 40 years. I helped build it." Holloway exchanged a skeptical glance with his partner. "Sure you did." Another passerby stopped. A teenager, maybe 17, pulled out his phone and joined the growing number of onlookers. The air shifted. This wasn't just another stop anymore, this was a spectacle. But the officers, either too focused or too proud, didn't notice the tension rising. "Let's run his name," Mills said. "What's your name, sir?" Still facing the cruiser, the man replied, "Harold Emerson." "Harold James Emerson." Mills typed it into the system. As the search loaded, Holloway noticed something strange on one of the scattered papers, an embossed seal from the Department of Justice. He frowned and picked it up. It was an official letter, addressed to a judge. Harold Emerson, retired, Federal District Court. His eyes widened. "Hey, Darren." But before he could finish, the screen on the cruiser flashed green. A full record came up, not criminal, but civil service. Numerous awards, degrees, a long-standing record with the Bar Association. The words federal judge Brett, civil rights attorney, and decorated veteran glowed back at him. Mills stared in stunned silence. In that moment, everything around them seemed to pause. The bystanders filming, the wind rustling the spilled papers. Even the old man, still calmly leaning against the car, eyes closed as if praying for patience, felt the shift in the air. Holloway backed up slowly. "Sir, I'm sorry. We didn't realize." "You didn't care to realize," Judge Emerson interrupted, turning to face them. His voice was no longer soft, it was steel. Controlled, deliberate, powerful. "You saw an old black man and thought, he doesn't belong here. You never asked where I was going. You never asked if I needed help. You just assumed guilt." We were just following protocol," Mills tried, flustered. "No, son," Emerson cut in, adjusting his coat and picking up his scattered documents. "You weren't following protocol. You were following prejudice." He bent down slowly to retrieve his notepad, taking a deep breath as he rose. His gaze pierced both men like a blade. "I've spent my life defending this country, prosecuting injustice, and mentoring men younger than both of you to do better. And still, after all that, I'm just a suspect on your patrol route." A heavy silence followed. Onlookers now whispered among themselves. One woman shook her head, muttering, "Unbelievable." The teenage boy gave the judge a nod of respect. Judge Emerson turned and walked away without another word, his leather satchel clutched tightly in his hand. The officers didn't stop him. They couldn't. Behind him, the shattered remains of their assumptions lay scattered like the papers they'd thrown on the ground, messy, irreparable, and caught forever on camera. By the next morning, the video had spread across the internet like wildfire. What began as a grainy phone recording shared on a local community page exploded into a national headline overnight. The image of an elderly black man, calm and composed while being roughly handled by two uniformed officers, stirred something deep in the public conscience. People didn't just watch, they reacted. Outrage bloomed across platforms. Hashtags surged. Hashtag Judge Emerson trended within hours. Major news outlets picked up the story with headlines that read, "Retired federal judge racially profiled during evening walk." Clips of the incident played on the morning news as anchors struggled to mask their disbelief. Some viewers immediately recognized the man from public records and past news footage. Others remembered him from courtroom victories that changed lives. In time, the full picture came into focus. Judge Harold J. Emerson, not just any man, but a civil rights attorney who had once stood beside legends. A veteran of the U.S. Army. A federal judge with decades of service, known for fairness, wisdom, and an unwavering commitment to justice. He had presided over landmark cases on police reform, voting rights, and wrongful convictions. His name was etched into the history books of law schools across the country, a man of great stature and quiet dignity. The backlash was immediate and unforgiving. The city's mayor, pressed by a flurry of questions, held a hasty press conference. Flanked by stone-faced officials, she expressed deep concern over the footage and confirmed that both officers involved had been placed on administrative leave pending investigation. The police department issued a formal statement by mid-afternoon, emphasizing a commitment to fairness and zero tolerance for bias, though few were convinced. Community leaders demanded more, not just apologies, but structural change. Protesters began organizing, not to riot, but to walk, in silent solidarity, retracing Judge Emerson's quiet evening route. Meanwhile, Judge Emerson remained out of the spotlight. He had returned home the night before and refused interview requests, letting the noise of the world swirl around him without interference. He had lived through worse. He knew the anger would eventually cool. What mattered more, he believed, was what came next, whether this would simply become another viral moment, or something more. As the sun set again over Oak Ridge Heights, now buzzing with reporters and flashing cameras, a new question echoed across the nation. If this could happen to a federal judge, a man who had given his life to the law, then who among us was truly safe from judgment? For days, Judge Harold Emerson stayed quiet, letting the media storm roll outside his modest brick home like a distant thunder. He had never been one to seek attention, especially not in moments of personal pain. But as pressure mounted and public voices demanded to hear from the man at the center of the controversy, he finally agreed to a televised interview. Sitting in a plain living room chair, dressed in a sweater and slacks, he didn't speak with anger, he spoke with history. His voice, steady and warm, carried the weight of decades. He recounted growing up in the segregated South, marching for civil rights as a teenager, earning his law degree on scholarships few believed he deserved, and eventually arguing some of the toughest civil rights cases in federal court. He spoke of the time he defended a black family unjustly evicted, and of prosecuting hate crimes when others were too afraid to take the case. He described how, as a federal judge, he sought not just to enforce the law, but to interpret it in a way that protected the dignity of all people. "This wasn't the first time I've been judged by my skin," he said, looking straight into the camera. "But I'd hoped, after all these years of service, it might be the last." The world listened, captivated. His quiet composure, his refusal to villainize even the officers who wronged him, and his insistence on reform over revenge touched millions. Overnight, his name became more than a trending topic, it became a symbol. Schools began teaching his story. Commentators called him a living lesson in resilience. And somewhere, across the country, a young boy watching TV saw him and whispered to himself, "That could be me." The wave of public outcry didn't fade, it evolved. Inspired by Judge Emerson's grace and conviction, local leaders and national figures pushed for meaningful change. Under mounting pressure, the police department implemented sweeping reforms: mandatory anti-bias and de-escalation training, body cameras on every officer, and the creation of a civilian oversight board. The most powerful shift, however, came from Judge Emerson himself. Rather than retreat from the spotlight, he stepped forward with purpose, launching an initiative called the Emerson Protocol, a nationwide training program focused on empathy, community history, and the moral responsibility of public service. Even the two officers who had humiliated him stood before the cameras one final time, issuing a public apology. Their words were awkward but sincere, and Emerson accepted them, not because they deserved it, but because the future demanded it. Forgiveness, he said at a town hall gathering, is not forgetting, it's choosing to build something better from what was broken. In the end, his quiet strength had sparked something far louder than outrage, the movement. And while Judge Harold Emerson returned to his quiet walks, the world around him would never again be quite as silent.